Welcome to day one of the election campaign. My name is John. I'm a political strategist here in Ontario. I'm going to be covering the election, little 10-minute segments here, day by day. Just some thoughts from day one, some quick ones. I noticed Poilievre came out with a different stump. He had one that said Canada first, and prior to that, he'd been using axe the tax or boots not suits. I think Canada first is a good message and one they should stick with through the election because it's not really divisive. It's a very inclusive as far as like all the political ideas and ideologies. I thought Carney, right off the top, he looked a little bit tired and a little bit drab. And I think that he's really still playing off of the narrative of fear. He still wants people to think that it's extremely important that he gets elected because we're in a dire situation. And I thought Poilievre looked more hopeful today. And I wonder how that's going to play out because they both acknowledged the tariffs, but Poilievre was much more hopeful. He started off kind of joking around with his kids. I thought that was actually a pretty good start. Made him look kind of, personable and comfortable. And Carney looked a little bit awkward, and he did announce some things that most people would find favorable. He announced a tax cut for the middle class. I think that that's going to do well on both sides of the aisle. But conservatives are constantly asking for lower taxes, so it's kind of a right wing platform typically. He wants to get rid of trade barriers, which he mentioned again by July 1st, something conservatives have been talking about for a long time. So he's been kind of pushing fear. And Poilievre actually looked pretty hopeful today. Poilievre went into sort of, and they both did, but this is what people have to get used to, is it's a lot of the same old speeches. So it goes, sometimes the start of the speech is a little bit different. And with Carney's, it was because he mentioned the tax cut. And, but then it goes into the typical cliche. Both of them mention families not being able to afford things that they could in the past, and I find that again ironic with Mark Carney being an advisor over the last 5 years and in a global banking voice. A lot of the problems the people are facing is due to globalism and sort of maybe what I would call corporate globalism, where a lot of global corporations have emerged in the last 15 to 20 years, and that's really changed the dynamics of trade. And I think there's been a lot of unintended consequences that were mentioned but probably overlooked. And it was the fact that it would push down the middle classes, and that's exactly what's happened. But he's been a part of it, so I find it ironic that he acknowledges the problems but actually wipes his hands clean of them. Where Poilievre, I think, has a more genuine outsider view of the economy. And I think that sort of will play out throughout their narratives going forward. Both of them starting in Ontario, obviously being in Ottawa, but it's important. This is going to be the battleground for the election. Ontario is basically where a lot of ridings are. They had flipped conservative. They're now leaning liberal. So it's the Conservatives' job to pull those ridings back. A lot of the woke stuff that Trudeau was maybe pushing is not doing so well in Toronto anymore, especially with aging populations across the board of different demographics. So I think the Liberals were smart to move towards the center because that's basically where the province is heading and where most of the country is actually headed. So I think it's an interesting look there, like, because the Conservatives don't have as much to attack, but they do have Carney's record as a global banker and all of his conflicts of interest and his lack of political expertise. That brings me to the final point here, which is the media was really pushing back on Carney, and he's not getting a honeymoon. And what you typically see, and I believe the reason this is, people in politics are sensitive to outsiders. There's kind of a general understanding with everybody how things work, and there's sort of an unwritten rules, a code, you might say. And Carney doesn't understand that. And I think even the reporters on the left and the right find that to be a little bit off-putting. I think the fact that he sort of just slid in here and his family's living abroad, he was living abroad. He moved his headquarters to New York, and all of a sudden he sees an opportunity, and he's here because obviously he has to be here. His company didn't have to be here. His company moved to New York, but he has to be here, according to him. And he really looked, afraid, and he really looked almost pandemic era serious today, right? Like, this is a serious time, and I think he'd learned that. He's mimicking what he saw over the last 5 years. So I think that those are the narratives I'm looking for. I think that how this kind of evolves from here is interesting. I think it's funny that he accuses Poilievre of running a negative campaign, but his entire campaign has been that this is the end of the world, and you need to elect me for 4 years as a prime minister to deal with Donald Trump on a negotiation here. And the reporters were smart to ask, like, why not? And I thought this too, and I thought that he might actually do this because as an outsider, I wasn't sure. He was sort of a knuckleball to me. Like, it was hard to read him at the start, but now I realize he's sort of just a run-of-the-mill person who's probably doing what his advisors think. But if I were him, and I actually and the party actually believed in him, he should have been the prime minister for a month or two and give Canadians something to look at, right? Instead, he's doing a political maneuver. So that's where it's like, is he a banker here to solve things? Because if he's actually here to solve things, think about what he could have accomplished even in these few months here. And Parliament's prorogued, but with the NDP support, he would have been able to do a lot. And if he brought it back. So the fact that he didn't do that and he's running to an election to be the prime minister for 4 years does look kind of strange, because he's supposed to be an outsider who's here just to deal with this. In theory, he could maybe deal with this over the next 6 months, have it solved, and then, say, here, I'm going to turn the country back and be maybe a good guy, right? Instead, it looks like an old school power grab. So these are the things that I'm looking for. These are the narratives that they'll have to push throughout the election for Conservatives. I think that with Carney, there's always people like to appeal to authority. So when they see a banker, they think, oh, that's a good thing. Like, he's a banker, so he's a banker. But the reality is, bankers have crashed the economy more than people. The '08 recession, most of the problems that are causing the economy are actually eventually inevitably caused by bankers, right? Beyond that, the banker's also the guy that's taking the fees from your money. He's the guy that invests, you take the risk, he kind of takes the reward. That's a banker. So, the Conservatives need to pull that narrative out, which is not like he's this glorious pope of the banking world. It's more like, look at these guys. These are bankers, like, similar to sports agents, lawyers in a lot of ways, especially those in civil litigation. It's the same type of thing. It's like, they're not all trustworthy, and most of them have their own interests at heart. So that's basically the narrative the Conservatives should push. But I thought it was a pretty interesting day one. I think that you'll see, tomorrow things start to ramp up a little bit. I think the Conservatives, Poilievre's done this before. He's on the bus. He's tweeting out pictures of him and his family. That looked good. Very normal pictures. Carney, again, is more of he's not as savvy with how to deal with the public head on. So everything he does is done through a whole PR team. And they've done a pretty good job. They've done a pretty good job turning the party's image around after Trudeau. So, it's going to be an interesting campaign season. It's going to be one of the most interesting elections ever. But again, we'll see how the Conservatives are able to punch holes in the narrative that the only thing that matters is tariffs. And beyond that, they'll see if they can punch holes in his narrative, Carney's narrative, that he's here to solve all the problems that he's been involved with causing. And again, like I said on the first video, Harris, she had the same bump in approval when she took over from Biden. So this is quite common. So the media is going to push Carney, and he'll have more gaffes. Where they can really look to get him is by asking him questions about politics that he just flat-footed on. Because if they can, somebody can expose him as kind of not adequate for being a prime minister, maybe a great advisor, maybe a great piece, but not the whole thing. That's going to be massive for them. So that's what I look going forward. But yeah, today I think was a pretty standard number one day for campaigns. Everybody's probably tired, to be honest, because his campaign is already, this is campaign number two for him, which is not usual. You don't usually see a campaign and then another campaign. So his group's probably tired, and you might see that, and he looked tired, and you might see that wear on them. Where Poilievre, this is his first rodeo, his first run of the mill. Plus, Carney's already campaigned in a lot of these ridings as a liberal, like for the leadership, in a lot of these areas, the cities. And when you come back 2 months later, it doesn't have the same, or a month later, it doesn't have the same kind of push. Where Poilievre's now making his first push through, and he's going to be doing media and stuff. So he might have been smart to not do too much media and now go on a big whirlwind. So we'll see how it goes from here. But I think pretty standard day one. I think the narratives were pretty obvious. I think what everybody said was pretty clear. But yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes from here.